Hello and welcome to the CIS YouTube channel. My name is Jeremy Sammut and I'm a research fellow here at the CIS. I'd like to spend the next couple of minutes talking to you about the latest CIS report on Australia's child protection crisis. It's called Do Not Damage and Disturb, and it examines the relationship between child protection failures and the demand and cost pressures on Australia's $1.7 billion out-of-home care system. Now, the report contains a lot of information about growth in the size and cost of out-of-home care. For example, the number of children in care has doubled in the last decade. Real costs have also significantly increased. This has been driven by higher spending on special services for increasing numbers of children in care who have serious emotional, psychological and behavioural problems. Now, what I argue in the report is that the increasing size, cost and complexity of the system has increased because of the way state child protection services are failing and helping to damage the children they are meant to protect. And to make this argument, one of the things the report does is single out a key and really telling aspect. And what I think this illustrates is how bad are the outcomes for children due to the obsession that Australian child protection departments have with keeping dysfunctional families together at almost all costs. In 2009, the Federal Parliament rightly apologised to the forgotten Australians who were physically, sexually and emotionally abused in state and charitable children's institutions between the 1920s and the 1970s. Yet in the last decade, state governments have been quietly reinstitutionalising the out-of-home care system. Now, we used to call the institutions orphanages, but today we call them residential care or group homes. And between 2000 and 2010, the number of Australian children who couldn't live safely with their parents and were subsequently placed in residential care increased by 56% to over 1,800 children. Now, what the greater use of residential care reflects is the fact that most of the 36,000 children currently in some form of care have high needs. They have serious problems because the standard child protection policy and practice in all states is to keep vulnerable children with their underclass families and try to work with their dysfunctional parents to try and fix really hard to fix problems such as substance abuse, mental illness and domestic violence. But for many children, the efforts that are made to try and prevent maltreatment and entries into care does more harm than good, because removal from the family home only occurs as a last resort and it occurs too late. By the time they are taken into care after a long history of child protection concerns, these children have been harmed, sometimes irreparably, by prolonged exposure to parental abuse and neglect. To make matters worse, they are then further harmed by the instability experienced while they wait around in care for attempted family reunions that are highly likely to break down. Now, by the time some of these kids reach adolescence, they are severely disturbed and distressed. They exhibit uncontrollable, violent and often self-destructive behaviour. They are so damaged they can no longer live in a normal foster home, and very high-cost residential care is the only option. Now, having looked at all this evidence, what I've concluded is that thousands of Australian children are actually the victims of systems abuse. In the 1980s and 1990s, we closed down the vast majority of residential institutions because we realised how detrimental the impact of institutional care was on children. But 30 years later, for different reasons, governments are reopening the institutions to cater for all the children who are harmed by child protection failures. Now, my report therefore calls for a fundamental rethink. In cases where parents are demonstrably incapable of properly caring for their children, early statutory intervention and permanent removal of children should occur, preferably by means of adoption by suitable families. Now, as I point out in the report, more than 2/3 of children in care have been in their current care episode for longer than 2 years. Now, many of these children could have and should have been adopted years earlier, but for the taboo placed on adoption by family preservation obsessed child protection services. I also warn that without the kind of reform I am proposing, state governments are going to have to spend increasing sums providing residential care and other support services for all the children who are being damaged and disturbed by family preservation. Thanks for watching, and my report is available at cis.org.au.